recording. I am recording now. Hello and welcome. It has been a while. But here we are now. Okay. So, there we go. Let's just plug in my charger. All right. So, we left off. Where did we leave off? Did I not mark where I left off? Alright. Oh, if I can just retrace my steps, I will be able to find it. Oh, yeah, there we go. Alright, so yeah. So last we left off, Chiyo or Sayuri is still trying to sell her virginity. She went to the Baron's estate in, I don't know where, but somewhere, to look at the blossoms, and he basically assaulted her. Not, I wouldn't say it was sexually, but nothing like no intercourse or anything. He just undressed her and stuff like that. Yeah, that's where we left off. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, it was. Alright, yeah. So now, we're following that scene. Somewhat. Oh, and she is also gonna be one of the key dancers in the dances of the old capital, which is like it's not a play per se, but it's like It's a big thing. So yeah, we will start with chapter 23. So exciting because there's 10 or 11 more chapters to go. So I'm excited about that. But I don't know how many more sessions it's going to take me to finish it, because it is a pretty big book. Let me see how much I want to read too. Alright, we'll see how much I want to read tonight. But yeah, let's get started. So, chapter 23. Chapter 23. I won't say my emotions had settled themselves by the time the train pulled into Kyoto Station early the following morning. After all, when a stone is dropped into a pond, the water continues quivering even after the stone has sunk to the bottom. But when I descended those wooden stairs carrying us from the platform, with Mr. Ichida one step behind me, I came upon such a shock that for a time I forgot everything else. There in a glass case was the new poster for that season's Dances of the Old Capitol, and I stopped to have a look at it. 2 weeks remained before the event. The poster had been distributed just the previous day, probably while I was strolling around the Baron's estate, hoping to meet up with the chairman. The dance every year has a theme, such as colors of the four seasons in Kyoto, or famous places from Tale of the Heike. This year the theme was the gleaming light of the morning sun. The poster, which of course was drawn by Uchida Kosaburo, Kasaburo. I feel like I'm like pronunciating these names like too much. Yeah, the poster, which of course was drawn by Uchida Kosaburo, who'd created nearly every poster since 1919, showed an apprentice geisha in a lovely green and orange kimono, standing on an arched wooden bridge. I was exhausted after my long trip and had slept badly on the train, so I stood for a while before the poster in a sort of daze, taking in the lovely greens and golds of the background, before I turned my attention to the girl in the kimono. She was gazing directly into the bright light of the sunrise, and her eyes were a startling blue-gray. I had to put a hand on the railing to steady myself. I was the girl Uchida had drawn there on that bridge. On the way back from the train station, Mr. Ichida pointed out every poster we passed, and even asked the rickshaw driver to go out of his way so we could see an entire wall of them on the old Daimaru department store building. Seeing myself all over the city this way wasn't quite as thrilling as I had imagined. I kept thinking of the poor girl in the poster standing before a before a mirror as her obi was untied by an older man. In any case, I expected to hear all sorts of congratulations of course over the course of the over the course of the following few days. But I soon learned that an honor like this never comes without costs. Ever since Mamaha had arranged for me to take a role in the seasonal dances, I had heard any I'd heard any number of unpleasant comments about myself. Yeah, I'd heard any. I feel like that's supposed to say many instead of any. I feel like that's a typo, but I feel like it could be read either way. But yeah, ever since Mama had arranged for me to take a role in the seasonal dances, I'd heard any number of great I'd heard any number of unpleasant comments about myself. After the poster, things only grew worse. The next morning, for example, a young apprentice who'd been friendly the week before now looked away when I gave a bow to greet her. As for Mamaha, I went to visit her in her apartment, where she was recovering, and found that she was as proud as if she herself had been on the one in the poster. Certainly, she wasn't pleased that I'd taken the trip to Hakone, but she seemed but she seemed as devoted to my success as ever. Strangely, perhaps even more so. For a while, I worried she would view my horrible encounter with the Baron as a betrayal of her. I imagine Ichoda, uh, I imagine Mr. Ichoda must have told her about it. But if he did, she never raised, she never raised the subject between us. Neither did I. 2 weeks later, the seasonal dances opened. On that first day in the dressing room of the Kaburenjo Theater, I felt myself almost overflowing with excitement, for Mama had told me the chairman and Nobu would be in the audience. While putting on my makeup, I tucked the chairman's handkerchief beneath my dressing robe against my bare skin. Yeah, yeah, I am pretty sure he absolutely knew what was going to happen. Hold on. There we go. Yeah. Uh, while putting on my makeup, I tucked the chairman's handkerchief beneath my dressing robe against my bare skin. My hair was bound closely to my head with a silk strip because of the wigs I would be wearing. And when I saw myself in the mirror without the familiar frame of hair surrounding my face, I found angles on my cheeks and around my eyes that I'd never before seen. It may seem odd, but when I realized that the shape of my own face was a surprise to me, I had the sudden insight that nothing in life is ever as simple as we imagine. An hour later, I was standing with the other apprentices in the wings of the theater, ready for the opening dance. We wore identical kimono of yellow and red, with obis of orange and gold, so that we looked, each of us, like shimmering lights in sunlight. When the music began, with that first thump of the drums and the twang of all the shamisen, we danced out together like a string of beads, our arms outstretched, our folding fans open in our hands. I had never before felt so much a part of something. After the opening piece, I rushed upstairs to change my kimono. The dance in which I was to appear as a solo performer was called The Morning Sun on the Waves, about a maiden who takes a morning swim in the ocean and falls in love with an enchanted dolphin. My costume was a magnificent pink kimono with a water design in gray, and I held blue silk strips to symbolize the rippling water behind me. The enchanted dolphin prince was played by a geisha named Umiyo. In addition, there were roles for geisha portraying wind, sunlight, and sprays of water, as well as a few apprentices in charcoal and blue kimono as at the far reaches of the stage, playing dolphins calling their prince back to them. My costume change went so quickly that I found myself with a few minutes to peek out at the audience. I followed the sound of occasional drum beats to a narrow, darkened hallway, running behind one of the two orchestra booths at the sides of the theater. I followed the sound of occasional drum beats to a narrow, darkened hallway, running behind one of the two orchestra booths at the sides of the theater. A few other apprentices in Geisha were already peering. Yeah, uh, a few other apprentices in Geisha were already peering out through carved slits in the sliding doors. I joined them and managed to find the chairman and Nobu sitting together, though it seemed to me the chairman had given Nobu the better seat. Nobu was peering at the stage intently, but I was surprised to see that the chairman seemed to be falling asleep. From the music, I realized that it was the beginning of Mamaha's dance, and went to the end of the hallway, where the slits in the doors gave a view of the stage. I watched Mamaha no more than a few minutes, and yet the impression her dance made on me has never been erased. Most dances of the Ino, Inoue most dances of the Inoue school tell a story of one kind or another, and the story of this dance, called A Courtier Returns to His Wife, was based on a Chinese poem about a courtier who carries on a long affair with a lady in the imperial palace. One night, the courtier's wife hides. One night, the courtier's wife hides on the outskirts of the palace to find out where her husband has been spending his time. Finally, at dawn, she watches. One night, the courtier's wife hides on the outskirts of the palace to find where her husband has been spending his time. Finally, at dawn, she watches from the bushes as her husband takes leave of his mistress. But by the time she has fallen ill, but by this time she has fallen ill from the terrible cold and dies soon afterward. For our spring dances, the story was changed to Japan instead of China, but otherwise the tale was the same. Mamaha played the wife who dies of cold and heartbreak, while the geisha Kanako played the role of her husband, the courtier. I watched the dance from the moment the courtier bids goodbye to his mistress. You emblazoned the story of sad. Yeah, I mean, you got it, man. Nothing, no one is ever happy in this book. No one. It's all fake happiness. Alright. Nothing is ever good. No, nothing is ever good. Okay. So, yeah. Yeah, I watched the dance from the moment the courtier bids goodbye to his mistress. Already, the setting was inspiringly beautiful, with the soft light of dawn and the slow rhythm of the shamisen music, like a heartbeat in the background. The courtier performed a lovely dance of thanks to his mistress for their night together, and then moved toward the light of rising sun to capture its warmth for her. This was the moment when Mamaha began to dance her lament of terrible sadness, hidden to one side of the stage, out of view of the husband and the mistress. Whether it was the beauty of Mamaha's dance or of the story, I cannot say, but I found myself but I found myself feeling such sorrow as I watched her. I felt as if I myself had been the victim of that terrible betrayal. At the end of the dance, sunlight filled the stage. Mama had crossed to a grove of trees to dance her simple death scene. I cannot tell you what happened after that. I was too overcome to watch any further, and in any case, I had to return backstage to prepare for my own entrance. While I waited in the wings, I had the peculiar feeling that the weight of the entire building was pressing down on me. Because of course, sadness has always seemed to me an oddly heavy thing. A good dance a good dancer often wears her white button socks a size too small, so she can sense the seams of the wooden stage with her feet. But as I stood there trying to find the strength within myself to perform, I had the impression of so much weight upon me that I felt not only the seams in the stage, but even the fibers in the socks themselves. At last I heard the music of the drums and shamisen and the whisking noise of the clothing, as the other dancers moved quickly past me onto the stage. But it's very hard for me to remember anything afterward. I'm sure I raised my arms with my folding fan closed and my knees bent, for this was the position I was. For this was the position. Yeah, for this was the position in which I made my entrance. I heard no suggestion afterward that I missed my cue, but all I remember clearly is watching my own arms with amazement at the sureness and evening, at the sureness and evenness in which with which they moved. I had practiced this dance many number of times. I suppose this must have been enough, because although my mind had shut down completely, I performed my role without any difficulty or nervousness. At every performance for the rest of that month, I prepared for my entrance in the same way by concentrating on the courtier returns to his wife until I could feel the sadness laying itself over me. We human beings have a remarkable way of growing accustomed to things, but when I pictured Mamaha dancing her slow lament, hidden from the eyes of her husband and his mistress, I could no longer have stopped myself from feeling that sadness. Then you could stop yourself from smelling an apple that has been cut open on the table before you. One day, in the final week of performances, Mamaha and I staged late. Mamaha and I stayed late in the dressing room, talking with another geisha. We had, when we left the theater, we expected to find no one outside, and indeed, the crowd had gone. The crowd had gone. But as we reached the street, a driver in uniform stepped out of the car and opened the rear door. Mamaha and I were on the point of walking right past when Nobu emerged. "Why, Nobu-san," Mamaha said. "I was beginning to worry that you no longer cared for Sayuri's company. Every day this past month, we've hoped to hear something from you." Who are you to complain about being kept waiting? I've been outside this theater nearly an hour. "Have you just come from seeing the dances again?" Mamaha said. "Sayuri is quite a star." "I haven't just come from anything," Nobu said. "I've come from the dances a full hour ago. Enough time has passed for me to make a phone call and send my driver downtown to pick something up for me." Nobu banged on the window of the car with his one hand and startled the poor driver so badly his cap fell off. The driver rolled down the window and gave Nobu a tiny shopping bag in the Western style, made of what looked like silver foil. Nobu turned to me, and I gave him a deep bow and told him how happy I was to see him. "You're a very talented dancer, Sayuri. I don't give gifts for no reason," he said, though I don't think this was in any way true. "Probably that's why Mamaha and the others in Gion don't like me as much as other men." "Nobu-san," said Mamaha. "Who has ever suggested such a thing?" "I know perfectly well what geisha you like. So long as a man gives you presents, you'll put up with any sort of nonsense." Nobu held out the small package in his hand for me to take. "Why, Nobu-san," I said, What nonsense is it that you are asking me to put up with?" I meant this as a joke, but of course, Nobu didn't see it that way. "Haven't I just said I'm not like other men?" he growled. "Why don't you geisha ever believe anything told to you? If you want this package, you'd better take it before I change my mind." I thanked Nobu and accepted the package, and he banged on the window for the car once again. The driver jumped up to hold the door for him. We bowed until the car had turned the corner, and then Mamaha led me back into the garden of the Kaburenja Theater, where we took a seat on a stone bench overlooking the carp pond and peered into the bag Nobu had given me. It contained only a tiny box, wrapped in gold-colored paper, embossed with the name of a famous jewelry store, and tied with a red ribbon. I opened it to find a simple jewel, a ruby as big as a peach pit. It was like a giant drop of blood sparkling in the sunlight over the pond. When I turned it in my fingers, the glimmer jumped from one face to the other. I could feel each of the jumps in my chest. "I can see how thrilled you are," Mamaha said, "and I'm very happy for you. But don't enjoy it too much. You'll have other jewels in your life, Sayuri. Plenty of them. I should think. You'll have other jewels in your life, Sayuri. Plenty of them, I should think. But you'll never have this opportunity again. Take this ruby back to your Okiya and give it to Mother." To see this beautiful jewel and the light that seeped out of it, painting my hand pink, and to think that and to think of Mother with her sickly yellow eyes and their meat-colored rims. Well, it seemed to me that giving this jewel to her would be like dressing up a badger in silk. But of course, I had to obey Mama Hut. When you give it to her, she went on, you must be especially sweet and say, Mother, I really have no need for a jewel like this and would be honored if you'd accept it. I've caused you so much trouble over the years. But don't say more, or she'll think you're being sarcastic. When I sat in my room later, grinding an ink stick to write a note of thanks to Nobu, my mood grew darker and darker. If Mama herself had asked me for the ruby, I could have given it to her cheerfully. But to give it to Mother? I had grown fond of Nobu, and was sorry that his expensive gift would go to such a woman. I knew perfectly well that if the ruby had been from the chairman, I couldn't have given it up at all. In any case, I finished the note and went to Mother's room to speak with her. She was sitting in the dim light, petting her dog and smoking. What do you want? Yeah, what do you want? She said. She said to me, I'm about to send for a pot of tea. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mother. This afternoon, when Mama and I left the theater, President Nobu Toshikazu was waiting for me. Waiting for Mama-san, you mean? I don't know, Mother, but he gave me a gift. It's a lovely thing, but I have no use for it. I wanted to say that I would be honored if she would take it, but Mother wasn't listening to me. She put her pipe down onto the table and took the box from my hand before I could even offer it to her. I tried again to explain things, but Mother just turned over the box to dump the ruby into her oily fingers. What is this? Yeah, what is this? She asked. It's the gift President Nobu gave me. Nobu Toshikazu of Iwamura Electric, I mean. Don't you think I know who Nobu Toshikazu... God damn it, I cannot read for my life today. Don't you think I know who Nobu Toshikazu is? She got up from the table to walk over to the window, where she slid back the paper screen and held the ruby into the stream of late afternoon sunlight. She was doing what I had done on the street, turning the gem around and watching the sparkle move from face to face. Finally, she closed the screen again and came back. You must have understood. Did he ask you to give it to Mamaha? Well, Mamaha was with me at the time. I could see that Mother's mind was like an intersection with too much traffic in it. She put the ruby onto the table and began to puff on her pipe. I saw every cloud of smoke as a little confused thought released into the air. Finally, she said to me, So Nobu Toshikazu has an interest in you, does he? I've been honored by his attention for some time now. At this, she put the pipe down onto the table, as if to say that the conversation was about to grow much more serious. I haven't watched you as closely as I should have, she said. If you've had any boyfriends, now is the time to tell me. I've never had a single boyfriend, Mother. I don't know whether she believed what I'd said or not, but she dismissed me just the same. I hadn't yet offered her the ruby to keep, as Mama had instructed me to do. I was trying to think of how to raise the subject, but when I glanced at the table where the gem lay on its side, she must have thought I wanted it back. She must have thought I had wanted to ask for it back. I had no time to say anything further before she reached out and swallowed it up in her hand. Finally, it happened. One afternoon, only a few years. Yeah, finally, it happened. One afternoon, only a few days later, Mama came to the Okia and took me into the reception room to tell me that the bidding for Maya Mizuwage had begun. She had received a message from the mistress of the Ichiriki that morning. I couldn't be more disappointed at the timing, Mama said, because I have to leave for Tokyo this afternoon. But you won't need me. You'll know if the bidding goes high, because things will start to happen. I don't understand, I said. What sort of things? All sorts of things, she said, and then left without even taking a cup of tea. She was gone 3 days. At first my heart raced every time I heard one of the maids approaching, but 2 days passed without any news. Then on the third day, Auntie came to tell me, then on the third day, Auntie came to me in the hallway to say that Mother wanted me upstairs. I had just put my foot onto the first step when I heard a door slide open, and all at once Pumpkin came rushing in. And all at once Pumpkin came rushing down. She came like water poured from a bucket. So fast her feet scarcely touched the steps, and midway down she twisted her finger on the banister. It must have hurt, because she let out a cry and stopped at the bottom to hold it. "Where's Hatsumomo?" she said, clearly in pain. "I have to find her." "It looks to me as if you've hurt yourself badly enough," Auntie said. You have to go find Hatsumomo so she can hurt you more?" Pumpkin looked terribly upset, and not only about her finger, but when I asked her what was the matter, she just rushed to the entryway and left. Mother was sitting at the table when I entered her room. She began to pack her pipe with tobacco, but soon thought better of it and put it away. I'm gonna take a swig of water. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, yeah. Mother was sitting at the table when I entered her room. She began to pack her pipe with tobacco, but soon thought better of it and put it away. On top of the shelves, holding the account books, stood a beautiful European-style clock in a glass case. Mother looked at it every so often, but a few long minutes passed, and still she said nothing to me. Finally, I spoke up. Oh. Oh. Yeah. Finally, I spoke up. I'm sorry to I'm sorry to disturb you, mother, but I was told you wanted to see me. The doctor is late, she said. We'll wait for him. I imagine she was referring to Dr. Crabbe, that he was coming to the Okia to talk about arrangements for my Mizuwage. I hadn't expected such a thing and began to feel a tingling in my belly. Mother passed the time by patting Taku, who quickly grew tired of her attentions and made little growling noises. At length, I heard the maids greeting someone in the front entrance hall below, and Mother went down the stairs. When she came back a few minutes later, she was escorting Dr. Crabbe. She, yeah, when she came back a few minutes later, she wasn't escorting Dr. Crabbe at all, but a much younger man with smooth silver hair, carrying a leather bag. This is the girl, Mother said to him. I bowed to the young doctor, who bowed back to me. Ma'am, he said to Mother, where shall we? Uh, hold on. sorry, guys. My mom wanted to show me something pretty cool. And she showed me a fucking... It was $1 bill. And it was from 1957. And it was like a silver certificate. And there were 5 of them that she found in the register. And I'm just like, that's pretty cool. That's pretty fucking neat. And from so long ago, that's like still pretty fucking neat. Okay, but let's get on with it. Still need to put tape on the edge of this. Okay, but yeah. Yeah. At length, I heard the maids greeting someone in the front entrance hall below, and Mother went down the stairs. When she came back a few minutes later, she wasn't escorting Dr. Crabbe at all, but a much younger man with smooth silver hair, carrying a leather bag. "This is the girl," Mother said to him. I bowed to the young doctor, who bowed back at me. "Ma'am," he said to Mother, "where shall we—" Mother told him the room we were in would be fine. The way she closed the door, I knew something unpleasant was about to happen. She began by untying my obi and folding it onto the table. Then she slipped the kimono from my shoulders and hung it on the stand in the corner. I stood in my yellow underrobe as calmly as I knew how, but in a moment Mother began to untie the waistband that held my underrobe shut. I couldn't quite stop myself from putting my arms around... I couldn't quite stop myself from putting my arms in her way, though she pushed them aside just as the Baron had done, which gave me a sick feeling. After she'd removed the waistband, she reached inside and pulled out my koshimaki once again, just as it had happened in Hakone. I didn't like this a bit, but instead of pulling open my robe as the Baron had, she refolded it around me and told me to lie down on the mats. The doctor knelt at my feet, and after apologizing and peeled open my underrobe to expose my legs. The doctor knelt at my feet, and after apologizing, peeled open my underrobe to expose my legs. Mamaha had told me a little bit about Mizuwake, and it seemed to me I was about to learn more. Had the bidding ended and this young doctor emerged the winner? What about Dr. Crabbe and Nobu? It even crossed my mind that Mother might be intentionally sabotaging Mama's plans. Because they think she's a stupid girl. That's why. Yeah. It even crossed my mind that Mother might be intentionally sabotaging Mama's plans. The young doctor adjusted my legs and reached between them with his hand, which I had noticed was smooth and graceful like the chairman's. I felt so humiliated and exposed that I had to cover my face. I wanted to draw my legs together, but I was afraid anything that made his task more difficult would only prolong the encounter. So I lay with my eyes pinched shut, holding my breath. I felt as little as Taku must have felt the time he choked on a needle. And Auntie held his jaws open while Mother put her fingers down his throat. At one point, I think the doctor had both his hands between my legs, but at last he took them away and folded my robe shut. When I opened my eyes, I saw him wiping his hands with a cloth. "The girl is intact," he said. "Well, that's fine news," the Mother replied. "And will there be much blood?" "Yeah, and will there be much blood?" There shouldn't be any blood at all. I only examined her visually. No, I mean during Mizuwage. I couldn't say. The usual amount I should expect. When the young silver-haired doctor had taken his leave, Mother helped me dress and instructed me to sit at the table. Then, without any warning, she grabbed my earlobe and pulled it so hard I cried out. She held me like that, with my head close to hers, while she said, "You're a very expensive commodity, little girl. I underestimated you. I'm lucky nothing has happened, but you may be very sure I'm going to watch you more closely in the future. What a man wants from you, a man will pay dearly to get. Do you follow me?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. Of course, I would have said yes to anything considering how hard she was pulling my ear. "If you give a man freely what he ought to pay for, you'll be cheating this Okia. You'll owe money, and I'll take it from you. And I'm not just talking about this." Here, Mother made a gruesome noise with her free hand, rubbing her fingers against her palm to make a squishing noise. "Men will pay for that," she went on, "but they'll pay just to chat with you too. If I find you sneaking off to meet a man, even if it's just for a little talk." And here she finished her thought by giving another sharp tug at my earlobe before letting it go. I had to work. I had to work hard to catch my breath. When I felt I could speak again, I said, "Mother, I've done nothing to make you angry." "Not yet, you haven't. If you're a sensible girl, you never will." I tried to excuse myself, but Mother told me to stay. She tapped on her pipe, even though it was empty, and everyone's so everyone's so mean. Especially, yeah. Yep. I tried to excuse myself, but Mother told me to stay. She tapped out her pipe, even though it was empty, and when she'd filled it and lit it, she said, "I've come to a decision. Your status here in the Okia is about to change." I was alarmed by this and began to say something, but Mother stopped me. "You and I will perform a ceremony next week. After that, you'll be my daughter, just as if you'd been born to me. I'd I've come to the decision to adopt you. One day, the Okia will be yours." I couldn't think of what to say, and I don't remember much of what happened next. Mother went on talking, telling me that as the daughter of the Okia, I would have at some point move I would at some point move into the larger room occupied by Hatsumomo and Pumpkin, who together should share the smaller room where I'd lived up to now. I was listening with only half mind, until I began slowly to realize that as Mother's daughter, I would no longer have to struggle under Hatsumomo's tyranny. Yeah, it's quite a turn. Yeah, 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 she was. Yeah, because now she's realized that Sayuri is a better investment. So she's gonna fucking make sure Sayuri knows that she ain't playing no games when it comes to investing in her and adopting her. I was listening with only half mind until I began slowly to realize that as Mother's daughter, I would no longer have to struggle under Hatsumomo's tyranny. This had been Hamama's plan all along, and yet I'd never really believed it would happen. Mother went on lecturing me. I looked at her I looked at her drooping lip and her yellowed eyes. She may have been a hateful woman, but as the daughter of this hateful woman, I would be up on a shelf out of Hatsumomo's reach. In the midst of all this, the door slid open, and Hatsumomo herself stood there in the hallway. What do you want? Mother said. I'm busy. Get out, she said to me. I want to talk with Mother. Oh, is this a scene? Or is it not the scene? Or is the next one the scene? It doesn't happen. Probably won't happen until much later. I want to talk with Mother. If you want to talk with me, Mother said, you may ask Sayuri if she'll be kind enough to leave. Be kind enough to leave, Sayuri. Hatsumomo said sarcastically. And then, for the first time in my life, I spoke back to her without the fear she would punish me for it. I'll leave if Mother wants me to, I told her. Mother, would you be kind enough to make little Miss Stupid leave us alone? Hatsumomo said. Stop making a nuisance of yourself, Mother told her. Come in and tell me what you want. Hatsumomo didn't like this, but she came and sat at the table anyway. She was midway between Mother and me, and still so close I could smell her perfume. Poor Pumpkin has just come running to me, very upset, she said. I promised her I'd speak with you. She told me something very strange. She said, Oh, Hatsumomo, Mother has changed her mind. But I told her I doubted it was true. I don't know what she was referring to. Yeah, I don't know what she was referring to. I certainly haven't changed my mind about anything recently. Yeah, I certainly haven't changed my mind about anything recently. Well, that's just what I said to her, that you would never go back on your word. But I'm sure she'd feel better, Mother, if you told her yourself. Told her what? That you haven't changed your mind about adopting her. Whatever gave her that idea? I never had the least intention of adopting her in the first place. It gave me a terrible pain to hear this, for I couldn't help thinking how Pumpkin had rushed down the stairs looking so upset, and no wonder, for no one could say any more what would become of her in life. Matsumo had been wearing that smile that made her look like an expensive piece of porcelain, but Mother's words struck her like rocks. Dunked on. Yeah, totally dunked on. Yeah, poor Pumpkin. I wonder how she's gonna handle this. Yikes. Yeah, it gave me a terrible pain to hear this, for I couldn't help thinking of how Pumpkin had rushed down the stairs looking so upset, and no wonder, for no one could say any more of what would become of her in life. Hatsumomo had been wearing that smile that made her look like an expensive piece of porcelain, but Mother's words struck her like rocks. She looked at me with hatred. Yeah. Yep. She is the worst. Yeah. She looked at me with hatred. So it's true. You're planning to adopt her. Don't you remember, Mother, when you said you were going to adopt Pumpkin? You asked me to tell her the news. What you may have said to Pumpkin is none of my concern. Besides, you haven't handled Pumpkin's apprenticeship as well as I expected. She was doing well for a time, but lately, you promised, Mother. Yeah, you promised, Mother, Hatsumoma said in a tone that frightened me. Don't be ridiculous. You know I've had my eye on Sayuri for years. Why would I turn around and adopt Pumpkin? I knew perfectly well Mother was lying. Now she went so far as to turn to me and say this. Sayuri-san, when was the first time I raised the subject of adopting you? A year ago, perhaps? If you've ever seen a mother cat teaching its young to hunt, the way she takes a helpless mouse and rips it apart, well, I felt as though Mother was offering me the chance to learn how I could be just like her. All I had to do was lie as she lied and say, "Oh yes, Mother, you mentioned Oh yes, Mother, you mentioned the subject to me many, many times." This would be my first step in becoming a yellow-eyed old woman myself one day, living in a gloomy room with my account books. I could no more take Mother's side than Hatsumomo's. I kept my eyes to the mat so I wouldn't have to see either of them, and said that I didn't remember. Hatsumomo's face was splotched red from anger. She got up and walked to the door, but Mother stopped her. "Sayuri will be my daughter in 1 week," she said. "Between now and then, you must learn how to treat her with respect. When you go downstairs, ask one of the maids to bring tea for Sayuri and me." Hatsumomo gave a little bow, and then she was gone. "Mother," I said, "I am very sorry to have been the cause of so much trouble. I'm sure Hatsumomo was quite wrong about any plans may have you may have made for Pumpkin. But I may ask, wouldn't it be possible to adopt both Pumpkin and me?" "Oh, so you know something about business now, do you?" she replied. "You want to try telling me how to run the Okia?" A few minutes later, a maid arrived bearing a tray with a pot of tea and a cup. Not 2 cups, but only a single one. Mother didn't seem to care. I poured her a cupful and she drank from it, staring at me with her red-rimmed eyes. And that is the end of that chapter. Oof. That's a big oof. Okay. So now we're on to the... No, it would not change anything. But yeah, on to chapter 24. Yeah, on to chapter 24. Maybe. Alright, well, yeah. Chapter 24. Let me just drink some water. When Mama had returned to town the following day, I learned that Mother had decided to adopt me. She didn't seem as pleased as I would have expected. She nodded and looked satisfied, to be sure, but she didn't smile. I asked if things hadn't turned out exactly as she. Yeah, I asked if things hadn't turned. Yeah, I asked if things hadn't turned out exactly as she'd hoped. Oh no, the bidding between Dr. Crab and Nobu just went as I had hoped, she told me. And the final figure and the final figure was a considerable sum. The moment I found out, I knew Mrs. Nita would certainly adopt you. I couldn't be more pleased. This is what she said. But the truth, as I came to understand in stages over the following years, was something quite different. For one thing, the bidding hadn't been a contest between Dr. Crab and Nobu at all. It had ended up a contest between Dr. Crab and the Baron. I can't imagine how Mamaha must have felt about this, but I'm sure it accounts for why she was suddenly so cold to me for a short time, and why she kept to herself the story of what really happened. I don't mean to suggest that Nobu was never involved. He did bid quite aggressively for my Mizuwage, but only during the first few days, until the figure passed 8,000 yen. When he ended up dropping out, it probably wasn't because the bidding had gone too high. Mamaha knew from the beginning that Nobu could bid against anyone if he wanted to. The trouble which Mamaha hadn't anticipated was that Nobu had no more than a vague interest in my Mizuwage. Only a certain kind of man spends his time and money chasing after Mizuwage, and it turned out that Nobu wasn't one of them. Some months earlier, as you may remember, Mamaha had suggested that no man would cultivate a relationship with a 15-year-old apprentice unless he was interested in her Mizuwage. This was during the same discussion when she told me, "You can bet it isn't your conversation he's attracted to." She may have been right about my conversation. I don't know. But whatever attracted Nobu to me, it wasn't my Mizuwage either. As for Dr. Crab, he was a man who would probably have chosen suicide the old-fashioned way before allowing someone like Nobu to take a Mizuwage away from him. Of course, he wasn't really bidding against Nobu after the first few days, but he didn't know that, and the mistress of the Ichiriki made up her mind not to tell him. She wanted the price to go as high as it could. So when she spoke to him on the telephone, she said things like, "Oh, doctor, I've just received word from Osaka, and an offer has come in for 5,000 yen. She probably had received word from Osaka, though it might have been from her sister, because the mistress never liked to tell outright lies. But when she mentioned Osaka and an offer in the same breath, naturally, Dr. Crab assumed the offer was from Nobu, even though it was actually from the Baron. As for the Baron, he knew perfectly well his adversary was the doctor, but he didn't care. He wanted the Mizuwage for himself, and pouted like a little boy when he began to think he might not win it. Sometime later, a geisha told me about a conversation she'd had with him around this time. "Do you hear what has been happening?" the Baron said to her. "I'm trying to arrange a Mizuwage, but a certain annoying doctor keeps getting in my way. Only one man can be the explorer of an undiscovered region, and I want to be that man. But what am I to do? This foolish doctor doesn't seem to understand that the numbers he throws about represent real money." As the bidding went higher and higher, the Baron began to talk about dropping out, but the figure had already come so close to a new record that the mistress of the Ichiriki made up her mind to push things still higher by misleading the Baron, just as she misled the doctor. On the telephone, she told him that the other gentleman had made a very high bid, and then added, However, many people believe he's still Yeah, however, many people believe he's the sort of gentleman who will go no higher. I'm sure they I'm sure there may have been people who believed such a thing about the doctor, but the mistress herself wasn't one of them. She knew that when the Baron made his last bid, whatever it was, the doctor would top it. In the end, Dr. Crabbe agreed to pay 11,500 yen for my Mizuwage. Up to that time, this was the highest ever paid for a Mizuwage in Gion, and possibly in any of the geisha districts in Japan. Keep in mind that in those days, 1 hour of a geisha's time cost about 4 yen, and an extravagant kimono might have sold for 1,500 yen. So it may not sound like a lot, but it's much more than, say, a laborer might have earned in a year. I have to confess, I don't know much about money. Most geisha pride themselves on never carrying cash with them. Yeah, that's a lot of fucking money. That's a lot of fucking money. Yeah, most geisha pride themselves on never carrying cash with them and are accustomed to charging things wherever they go. Even now in New York City, I live just the same way. I shop at stores that know me by sight, where the clerks are kind enough to write down the items I want. When the bill comes at the end of the month, I have a charming assistant who pays it for me. So you see, yeah, I couldn't possibly tell you how much money I spend, or how much more a bottle of perfume costs Than a magazine. So I may be one of the worst people on earth to try explaining anything at all about money. However, I want to pass on to you something a close friend once told me, who I'm sure knows what he's talking about, because he was Japan's Deputy Minister of Finance for a time during the 1960s. Cash, he said, is often worth less 1 year than it was the year before. And because of this, Mamaha's Meizuwage in 1929 actually cost more than mine in 1935. Even though mine was 11,500 yen, while Mamaha's was more like 7,000 or 8,000 yen. Of course, none of it mattered back at the time my Mizuwage sold. As far as everyone was concerned, I had set a new record, and it remained until 1951, when Katsumiya came along. He was, in my opinion, one of the greatest geisha of the 20th century. Still, according to my friend, the Deputy Minister of Finance, the real record remained Mamaha's until the 1960s. But whether the real record belonged to me, or to Katsumiya, or to Mamaha, or even to Mamamitsu, or even to Mamamitsu back in the 1890s, you can well imagine that Mother's plump little hands began to itch when she heard about a record amount of cash. It goes without saying that this was why she adopted me. The fee for my Mizuwage was more than enough to repay all my debts to the Okia. If Mother hadn't adopted me, some of that money would have fallen into my hands, and you can imagine how Mother would have felt about this. When I became the daughter of the Okia, my debts ceased to exist because the Okia absorbed them. But all of my profits went to the Okia as well. Not only then, at the time of my Mizuwage, but forever afterward. The adoption took place the following week. Already, my given name had changed to Sayuri. Now my family name changed as well. Back in my tipsy house on the sea cliffs, I had been Sakamoto Chiyo. Now my name was Nita Sayuri. Of all the important moments in the life of a geisha, Misawage certainly ranks as high as any. Mine occurred in early July of 1935, when I was 15 years old. It began in the afternoon when Dr. Crabbe and I drank sake in a ceremony that bound us together. The reason for this ceremony was that even though the Misawage itself would be over with quickly, Dr. Crabbe would remain my Misawage patron until the end of his life. Not that it gave him any special privileges, you understand. The ceremony was performed at the Ichiriki tea house, in the presence of mother, auntie, and mamaha. The mistress of the Ichiriki attended as well, and Mr. Beku, my dresser, because the dresser is always involved in ceremonies of this sort, representing the interests of the geisha. I was dressed in the most formal costume an apprentice wears, a black, five-crested robe and an underrobe of red, which is the color of new beginnings. Mama had instructed me to behave very sternly, as though I had no sense of humor at all. Considering my nervousness, I found it easy to look stern as I walked down the hallway of the Ichiriki tea house, with the train of my kimono pulled around my feet. After the ceremony, we all went to a restaurant known as the Kicho for dinner. This was a solemn event, too, and I spoke little and ate even less. Sitting there at dinner, Dr. Crabbe had already... sitting there at dinner, Dr. Crabbe had probably begun... Dr. Crabbe had probably already begun thinking about the moment that would come later. And yet, I've never seen a man who looked more bored. I kept my eyes lowered throughout the meal in the interests of acting innocent. But every time I stole a glance in his direction, I found him peering down through his glasses like a man at a business meeting. When dinner was over, Mr. Beku escorted me by rickshaw to a beautiful inn on the grounds of the Nanzenji Temple. He had already visited there earlier in the day to arrange my clothing in the adjoining room. He helped me out of my kimono and changed me into a more casual one, with an obi that required no padding for the knot, since padding would be awkward for the doctor. He tied the knot in such a way that it would come undone quite easily. After I was fully dressed, I felt so nervous that Mr. Beku had to help me back in my room and arranged me near the door to await the doctor's arrival. When he left me there, I felt a horrible sense of dread, when he left me there, I felt a horrible sense of dread, as if I'd been about to have an operation to remove my kidneys or my liver or some such thing. Soon, Dr. Crabbe arrived, and asked that I order him sake while he bathed in the bath attached to the room. I think he may have expected me to help him undress, because he gave me a strange look. But my hands were so cold and awkward, I don't think I could have done it. He emerged a few minutes later wearing a sleeping robe and slid open the doors to the garden, where we sat on a little wooden balcony, sipping sake and listening to the sound of the crickets and the little stream below us. I spilled sake on my kimono, but the doctor didn't notice. To tell the truth, he didn't seem to notice much of anything, except a fish that splashed in the pond nearby, which he pointed out to me as if I might never have seen such a thing. While we were there, a maid came and laid out both our futons, side by side. Finally, the doctor left me on the balcony and went inside. I shifted in such a way as to watch him from the corner of my eye. He unpacked two white towels from his suitcase and set them down on the table, arranging them this way and that until they were just so. He did the same with the pillows on one of the futons, and then came and stood at the door until I rose to my knees and followed him. While I was standing, he removed my obi and told me to make myself comfortable on one of the futons. Everything seemed so strange and frightening to me. I couldn't have been comfortable no matter what I'd done, but I lay down on my back and used a pillow stuffed with beans to prop up my neck. The doctor opened my robe and took a long while to loosen each of the garments beneath. Yeah, the doctor opened my robe and took a long while to loosen each of the garments between it step by step, rubbing his hands over my legs, which I think was supposed to help me relax. This went on for a time, but at last he fetched the two right yeah, but at last he fetched the two white towels he unpacked earlier. He told me to raise my hips and then spread them out beneath me. These will absorb the blood. Yeah, these will absorb the blood, he told me. Of course, a mizawage often involves a certain amount of blood, but no one had explained to me exactly why. I'm not sure why I should have kept quiet or even thanked the doctor for being so considerate as to put down towels, but instead I blurted out, "What blood?" My voice squeaked a little as I said it, because my throat was so dry. Dr. Crab began explaining how the hymen, though I didn't know what that could possibly be, frequently bled when torn, and this and that, and the other. I think I became so anxious hearing all. I think I became so anxious at hear. I think I became so anxious hearing it all that I rose up a little from the futon because the doctor put his hands on my shoulder and gently pushed me back down. I'm sure this sort of talk would be enough to squash some men's appetite for what they were about to do, but the doctor wasn't that sort of man. When he'd finished his explanation, he said to me, "This is the second time I will have the opportunity of collecting a specimen of your blood. May I show you?" I'd noticed that he'd arrived with not only his leather overnight bag, but also a small wooden case. The doctor fetched a key ring from the pocket of his trousers in the closet and unlocked the case. Because once you get your period, you're supposed to know everything, right? And that's including how to have sex, right? No, yeah, that's how you do it. Once someone comes of age, you just automatically assume that that person knows what to do. It's that simple. You just gain all the knowledge once you hit puberty, and then bam, you know things. Yeah, exactly. They know everything ever. Audience, I am being sarcastic. Please do not think I'm being serious. Because they think she's a stupid girl who doesn't know anything, and they don't want to waste time trying to explain everything to her. That's probably why they don't tell her anything. But yeah, I'd noticed that he'd arrived with not only his leather overnight bag, but also a small wooden case. The doctor fetched the doctor fetched a key ring from the pocket of his trousers and in the closet and unlocked the case. He brought it over He brought it over and swung it open down the middle to make a kind of freestanding display. On both sides were shelves with tiny glass vials, all plugged with corks and held in place by straps. Along the bottom shelf were a few instruments, such as scissors and tweezers, but the rest of the case was crowded with these glass vials, perhaps as many as 40 or 50 of them, except for a few empty ones on the top shelf. They all had something inside, but I had no idea what. Only when the doctor brought the lamp from the table was I able to see white labels along the top of each vial, marked with the names of various geisha. I saw Mama's name there, as well as the great, as well as the great Mama Kichi's. I saw quite a number of other familiar names as well, including Hatsumomo's friend Korin. This one, the doctor said as he removed one of the vials, belongs to you. He had written my name wrong, with a different character for the Ri of Sayuri, but inside the vial was a shriveled-looking thing. I, I thought I thought it resembled a pickled plum, though it was brownish rather than purple. The doctor removed the cork and used tweezers to take it out. This is a cotton swab that was drenched in your blood, he said. From the time you cut your leg, you'll recall. I don't normally save the blood of my patients, but I was very taken with you. After collecting the sample, I made up my mind that I would be your Mizawage patron. It's very fucking creepy, man. I agree. I totally agree. Also, this is not part of the ritual. This is just this is what he does. And it's very gross. It's kind of my thing, yeah. Yeah, after collecting the sample, I made up my mind that I would be your Mizawage patron. I think you'll agree it will make an unusual specimen to possess not just a sample of your blood collected at Mizawage, but also a sample taken from a laceration on your leg quite a number of months earlier. I hid my disgust while the doctor went on to show me several other vials, including Mama's. Hers contained not a cotton swab, but a small wadding of white fabric that was stained the color of rust and had grown quite stiff. Dr. Crabbe seemed to find all these samples fascinating, but for my part, well, I pointed my face to their direction in order to be polite, and when the doctor wasn't watching, I looked somewhere else. I looked elsewhere. Finally, he closed his case and set it aside before taking off his glasses, folding them and putting them on the table nearby. I was afraid the moment had come, and indeed, Dr. Crabbe moved my legs apart and arranged himself on his knees between them. I think my heart was beating at about the same speed as a mouse's. When the doctor untied the sash of his sleeping robe, I closed my eyes and brought a hand up to cover my mouth. But I thought better of it at the last moment in case I should make a bad impression, and let my hand settle near my head instead. The doctor's hands burrowed around for a while, making me very uncomfortable in much the same way as the young silver-haired doctor few weeks earlier. I need to drink some water. Yeah, yeah. The doctor's hands burrowed around for a while, making me very uncomfortable in much the same way as the young silver-haired doctor had a few weeks earlier. I keep wanting to say years, but no, it's weeks. Had a few weeks earlier. Then he lowered himself into Then he lowered himself until his body was poised just above mine. I put all the force of my mind to work. Yeah, I put all the force of my mind to work in making some sort of mental barrier between the doctor and me. But it wasn't enough to keep me from feeling the doctor's eel, as Mama Han might have called it, bump again, bump against the inside of my thigh. The lamp The lamp was still lit, and I searched the shadows on the ceiling for something to distract me, because now I felt the doctor pushing so hard that my head shifted on the pillow. I couldn't think of what to do with my hands, so I grabbed the pillow with them and squeezed my eyes tighter. Soon there was a great deal of activity going on above me, but I could feel all sorts of movement inside me as well. There must have been a very great deal of blood, because the air had an unpleasant metallic smell. I kept reminding myself how much the doctor had paid for this privilege, and I remember hoping at one point that he was enjoying himself more than I was. Yeah, and I remember hoping at one point that he was enjoying himself more than I was. I felt no more pleasure there than if someone had rubbed a file over and over against the inside of my thigh until I bled. Finally, the homeless eel marked its territory, I suppose, and the doctor lay heavily upon me, moist with sweat. I didn't like at all being so close to him, so I pretended to have trouble breathing in hopes he would take his weight off me. For a long while, he didn't move, but then all at once he got to his knees and was very businesslike again. I didn't I didn't watch him, but from the corner of my eye, I couldn't help seeing that he wiped himself off using one of the towels beneath me. He tied the sash of his robe, then put on his glasses, not noticing a little smear of blood on the edge of one lens, and began to wipe between my legs using towels and cotton swabs and the like, just as though we were back in one of the treatment rooms at the hospital. The worst of my discomfort had passed by this time, and I have to admit I was almost fascinated lying there, even when even with my legs spread apart so revealingly, as I watched him open the wooden case and take out scissors. He cut away a piece of the bloody towel beneath me and stuffed it, along with a cotton ball he'd used, into the glass vial with my misspelled name on it. Then he gave a formal bow and said, "Thank you very much." I couldn't very well bow back while laying down, but it made no difference, because the doctor stood at once and went off to the bath again. I hadn't realized it, but I'd been breathing very quickly from nervousness. Now that it was over and I was able to catch my breath, I looked as though I were in the middle of being operated upon. But I felt such relief I broke into a smile. Something about the whole experience seemed so utterly ridiculous to me. The more I thought about it, the funnier it seemed, and in a moment I was laughing. I had to keep quiet because the doctor was in the next room, but to think that the course of my entire future had been altered by this. I imagined the mistress of the Ichiriki making telephone calls to Nobu and the Baron while the bidding was underway. All the money that had been spent, and all the trouble. How strange it would have been with Nobu, since I was beginning to think of him as a friend. I didn't even I didn't even want to wonder what it would have been like with the Baron. While the doctor was still while the doctor was still in the bath, I tapped on the door to Mr. Beku's room. A maid rushed in to change the bed sheets, and Mr. Beku came to help me put on a sleeping robe. Later, after the doctor had fallen asleep, I got up again and bathed quietly. Mama had instructed me to stay awake all night, in case the doctor should awaken and need something. But even though I tried not to sleep, I couldn't help drifting off. I did manage to awaken in the morning in some time to make myself presentable before the doctor saw me. After breakfast, I saw Dr. Crab on the front to the front. Yeah. After breakfast, I saw Dr. Crab to the front door of the inn and helped him into his shoes. Just before he walked away, he thanked me for everything and gave me a small package. I couldn't make up my mind whether it might be a jewel like Nobu had given me, or a few cuttings of the bloody towel from the night before. But when I worked up my courage to open it back in the room, it turned out to be a package of Chinese herbs. I didn't know what to make of them until I asked Mr. Beku, who said I should make tea once a day with the herbs to discourage pregnancy. Be cautious with them, because they're very costly, he said. But don't be too cautious. They're still cheaper than an abortion. It's strange and very hard to explain, but the world looks so different after. Yeah, it's strange and very hard to explain, but the world looked different to me after Mizuwage. Pumpkin, who hadn't had hers, now seemed inexperienced and childlike to me somehow, even though she was older. Mother and auntie, as well as Hatsumomo and Mamaha, had all been through it, of course, and I was probably much more aware than they were of having this peculiar thing in common with them. After Mizuwage, an apprentice wears her hair in a new style, and with a red silk band at the base of the pincushion bun, rather than a patterned one. For a time, I was so aware of which apprentices had red hairbands and which had patterned ones that I scarcely seemed to notice anything else while walking down along. Well, let me say that again. Yeah, I was so aware of which apprentices had red hairbands and which had patterned ones that I scarcely seemed to notice anything else while walking along the street or in the hallways of the little school. I had a new respect for the ones who had been through Mizuwage and felt much more worldly than the ones who hadn't. I'm sure all apprentices feel changed by the experience of Mizuwage in much the same way I did. But for me, it wasn't just a matter of seeing the world differently. My day-to-day life changed as well, because of Mother's new view of me. She was the sort of person, I'm sure you realize, who noticed things only if they had price tags on them. When she walked down the street, her mind was probably working like an abacus. Oh, there's little Yukio. Those stupidity caught. Yeah. Oh, there's little Yukio, whose stupidity cost her poor older sister nearly 100 yen last year. And here comes Ichimitsu, who must be very pleased at the payments her new Danna is making. If Mother were to walk along the Shirakawa stream on a lovely spring day, you could almost see beauty itself dripping into water from the tendrils of the cherry trees. She probably wouldn't even notice any of it, unless, I don't know, she had a plan to make money from selling the trees or some such thing. Before my Mizuwage, I don't think it made any difference to Mother that Hatsumomo was causing trouble for me and Guillaume. And now that I had a high price tag on me, she put a stop to Hatsumomo's troublemaking. Even she put a stop to Hatsumomo's troublemaking without my even having to ask it of her. I don't know how she did it. She probably just said, "Hatsumomo, your your behavior causes problems for Sayuri and costs this Okiya money. Yeah, and costs this Okiya money. You will never be the one to pay it." Ever since Mother had grown ill, oh no, ever since my mother had grown ill, my life had certainly be yeah. Ever since my mother had grown ill, my life had certainly been difficult. But now for a time, things became remarkably uncomplicated. I won't say I never felt tired or disappointed. In fact, I felt tired much of the time. Life in Guillaume is hardly relaxing for the women who make a living there, but it was certainly a great relief to be freed from the treatment of Hatsumomo. Inside the Okiya, too, life was almost pleasurable. As the adopted daughter, I ate when I wanted. I chose my kimono first instead of waiting for Pumpkin to choose hers. And the moment I had made my choice, Auntie set to work sewing the seams to the proper width and basting the collar onto my underrobe before she touched even Hatsumomo's. I didn't mind when Hatsumomo looked at me with resentment and hatred because of the special treatment I now received. But when Pumpkin passed me in the Okiya with a worried look and kept her eyes averted from mine even when we were face to face, it caused me terrible pain. I'd always had the feeling our friendship would have grown. Yeah, I'd always had the feeling our friendship would have grown if only circumstances hadn't come between us. I didn't have that feeling any longer. With my Mizuwage behind me, Dr. Crab disappeared from my life almost completely. And I say almost, because even though Mamaha and I no longer went to the Shirae tea house to entertain him, I did run into him occasionally at parties in Guillaume. The Baron, on the other hand, I never saw again. I didn't yet know about the role he'd played in driving up the price of my Mizuwage, but as I looked back, I can understand why Mamaha may have wanted to keep us apart. Probably I would have felt every bit as uncomfortable around the Baron as Mamaha would have felt having me there. In any case, I can't pretend I'm Yeah, in any case, I can't pretend I missed either of these men. But there was one man I was very eager to see again, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you who and I'm sure I don't need to tell you I'm talking about the chairman. He hadn't played any role in Mama's plans, so I didn't expect my relationship with him to change or come to an end just because my Mizuwage was over. Still, I have to admit I felt very relieved the few weeks afterward to learn that Iwamura Electric had called to request my company once again. When I arrived that evening, both the chairman and Nobu were present. In the past, I would certainly have gone. Yeah, in the past, I certainly would have gone to sit beside Nobu, but now that Mother had adopted me, I wasn't obliged to think of him as my savior any longer. As it happened, the space beside the chairman was vacant, and so, with a feeling of excitement, I went to take it. The chairman was very cordial when I poured him sake, and thanked me by raising his cup in the air before drinking it. But but all evening long, he never looked at me, whereas Nobu, whenever I glanced in his direction, glared back at me as though I were the only person in the room he was aware of. I certainly knew what it was. I certainly knew what it was like to long for someone. So before the evening was over, I made a point of going to spend a bit. Yeah, so before the evening was over, I made a point of going to spend a bit of time with him. I was careful never to ignore him again after this. A month or so had passed. A month or so passed, and then one evening during a party, I happened to mention to Nobu that Mama had arranged for me to appear in a festival in Hiroshima. I wasn't sure he was listening when I told him, but the very next day, when I returned to the Okia after my lessons, I found my room. I found in my room a new wooden travel trunk he'd sent me as a gift. The trunk was much finer than the one I had borrowed from Auntie for the Baron's party in Hakone. I felt terribly ashamed of myself for having thought I could simply discard Nobu now that he was no longer central to any plans Mamaha might have had. I wrote him a note of thanks and told him I looked forward to expressing my gratitude in person when I saw him the following week at a large party Iwamura Electric had planned some months in advance. But then something peculiar happened. Shortly after the party, I received a message that my company wouldn't be needed after all. Yoko, who worked at the telephone in our Okia, was under the impression the party had been cancelled. As it happened, I had to go to the Ichiriki that night anyway for another party. Just as I was kneeling in the hallway to enter, wait, hold on. Let me just read that again. I got a little confused. Yeah, but then a peculiar thing happened. Shortly before the party, I received a message that my company wouldn't be needed after all. Yoko, who worked at the telephone in our Okia, was under the impression the party had been cancelled. As it happened, I had to go to the Ichiriki that night anyway for another party. Just as I was kneeling in the hall to en- just as I was kneeling in the hallway to enter, I saw the door to a large banquet room down the end slide open, and a young geisha named Katsue came out. Before she closed the door, I heard what I felt. I heard what I felt certain was the sound of the chairman's laughter coming from inside the room. I was very puzzled by this, so I rose to my knees and went to catch Katsue before she left the tea house. I'm very sorry to trouble you, I said, but have you just come from a party given by Iwamura Electric? Yes, it's quite lovely. There must be 25 geisha and nearly 50 men. And Chairman Iwamura and Nobu-san are both there? I asked her. Not Nobu. Apparently he went home sick this morning. He'll be very sorry to have missed it. But the chairman is there. Why do you ask? I muttered something, but I don't remember. I muttered something. I don't remember what it was. And she left. Up until this moment, I'd somehow imagined that the chairman valued my company as much as Nobu did. Now I had to wonder whether it had been. Now I had to wonder whether it had all been an illusion, and Nobu was the only person who cared, and Nobu was the only one who cared. And that is the end of that chapter. I think would read more, but I think I'm good here because I want to play some games. So I will stop here. Okay, well, thank you so much everyone for listening. I will see you in the next video. Well, you will hear from me in the next video. Bye.